So, thank you, good afternoon, and let's follow with this ambitious title, Extreme Climatic Events and Plant Production, New Challenges for Plant Ecophysiologists, which I reduced, sorry for those who expected more, to some lessons that I learned from recent works on grapevine under heat peak. So only one specific extreme climatic event, heat peak. I will try to explain why I call that heat peak rather than heat wave. And only grapevine example to illustrate my presentation. So at the beginning of this topic was a very impressive event that occurred in 2019 with an unprecedented heat wave in the Hérault and Gard region, which transformed into a heat peak because it was very intense with some records like 46 degrees in our regions. Very early, so before bunch closure for grapevine, so it's very rare that this kind of event occurs at this time of the plant cycle. And it was very sudden because it was preceded by quite a mild weather. So as you can see in this picture, the temperature exceeded those comprised between 1981 and 2010 by 1.5 to 7.5 degrees Celsius. So this was quite heterogeneous in the region, with some parts of the region with high, I don't know whether I can add the pointer here. So with some regions with very high temperature records here, and other regions with more usual temperature for the period. And this was accompanied by very huge injuries on plants, like illustrated here by some illustration taken from the medias. At this time, you can see that grapevine almost died. Some of them died. A lot of leaves died, and even the young berries that were formed at this date were burned. So to hold this question, I wonder whether this was important to address this issue, this new issue, which is a very extreme event. And to convince me, I selected this illustration where we can see that the frequency of intense heat waves in France is increasing, as you can see here, close to 2020 year. And is earlier and earlier. This frequency was quite present in August. It increased in July, and the frequency increased more in June. The last years were very marked by this kind of heat wave. And if we plot maximal intensity in terms of degrees Celsius here in y-axis against the duration of the heat wave, we can see that 2019 was not the strongest, which is in this direction, but what the maximal intensity among the recent years, with a duration which was quite short, so it was a sudden event. And to convince me more to work on that, I selected this picture where in France it is forecasted very large increase, very huge increase in this intensity of heat waves and in the duration of heat waves. So new heat peaks are very probable to occur again. And I tried then to schematize my view of what is new for us through this kind of a graphic here, where I tried to show that there is some kind of rather new question. I'm open to discussion about this new, but we come from moderate constraint, as was explained by some speakers previously in agronomic contexts, which was very largely studied in previous talks. And here we face a lethal constraint, which is a heat peak. And so we distort from this usual view that has been presented several times during this seminar, where the temperature effect can be represented as its influence on the rates of any processes in the plant, as illustrated by Boris, for example. And so if we try to represent how the plant grows during time and how it faces a heat peak, if we use this kind of analysis, what is produced? So with a slight moderate increase in temperature above the optimum here, you slow down the increase in growth. So you have a kind of step here where you can recover normal growth after this peak. But with the heat peak, you have organ or plant death, even plant death. And this cannot be simulated using even the extrapolation of this curve. You will simply obtain zero rate. So this kind of event, longer and longer. But you cannot predict what occurs in field or in plots where you have a decrease in photosynthesis or organ, for example, or in yield components. And so you cannot recover a normal growth, and you have a very huge decrease in plant production. This is my way of presenting the issue facing this new kind of stress. So how to analyze and model this kind of events and this kind of consequence on plant growth. I will not cover all you can imagine on this issue. I will not cover the impacts on pollen viability, which is more in continuity of what was done with moderate heat stress. I will not speak about resurrection of meristem and buds, which is also an important issue for forests, for example, but even for vineyards, because if you lose plants, this is a critical issue for the wine grower. And I will focus on photosynthetic surfaces. So how can we deal with this disappearance of photosynthetic surfaces? And this is accompanied by experimental and analytical issues specific to this kind of extreme events, because its stress is not unique. It's a combination of different conditions preceding climate, the rapidity of setting of the heat stress, whether it can be the plant can acclimate or not, whether it has carryover effects on the following year or the following of the plant cycle. And it is also a combination of date of occurrence relative to the plant cycle, the plant life, a combination of intensity, duration, a lot of things which makes the choose of a specific scenario to be studied very complicated. I will let Christine Granier speak more about that after me. And there is a further complexity if you consider the co-occurrence of other stressors like drought at the same time of heat stress. There is a huge number of conditions to explore, therefore, and the impact on the plants are very erratic, not as smooth as the response to temperature, for example. And it is on individuals which can be still living or maybe irreversibly dead or not. So this requires large numbers of observation and maybe probabilistic approaches. And another issue is the reduction of condition with envirotyping, which can be a solution in some cases to reduce this complexity. Here, it's hindered by the scarcity of these events. They are quite rare, even though they are increasing in frequency. So how to deal with that? How can we deal with the scarcity of these extreme heat stress events? how to collect some observation, and I will begin my illustration with that question. So these events are difficult to predict and to control. There are several attempts to control this kind of events, for example, by using heaters like that on some facilities in Illinois. But that can only heat the plant by a few degrees above air temperatures, which is far from what we have to face. And some other groups tried to warm the plant by using this kind of greenhouse effects with open-top chambers put at the basis of the plant, but it's only restricted to a part of the daytime. And here in l'Institut Agro at Montpellier, we benefited from a large collection of plants which was installed just at the core of this heatwave event in 2019, when the temperature increased up to 45 degrees. And we could observe some injuries like that, as you can see here, some leaf burns at the basis of the plant here. So this needs to be at the right time and the right place to observe these injuries and the damages induced by the heat wave on the heat peak on the plants. So we scored the injuries by quantifying the proportion of leaf firing on each subplot of 10 plants, 10 contiguous plants in this installation. And we also scored the intensity of leaf firing in a more qualitative way using photographs of the plants. And so what we observed by mapping the injuries over the whole plant here, each square represents 10 plants, and there were 2 rows of plants per row of in the vineyard. So 2 rows of potted plants here, one on the southwest side and the other one on the northeast side. So each square is for 10 plants, and as you can see, there is a strong effect facing the southwest side of the row, and there are strong effects on the base on the plot of the plant, more than at the top of them. So to qualify more precisely, this was not easy because we were quite surprised by the event. So we tried to model this effect to test whether we can put some hypothesis to explain why the injuries were localized as I described before. For doing that, we digitized the plants by using this apparatus here. So we digitized stem nodes, the petioles, and the main leaf veins. So we were able to define the orientation of each leaf and the position of each leaf in this mock-up here. And using a FSPM model, a functional structural plant model called HydroShoot, developed here in LEPSE and mainly in the last development by Rami Albasha and Benoit Palas, we were able to try to explain if the behavior of these mock-ups in the measured climatic conditions accounts for the injuries observed on the plants. And basically, HydroShoot is based on an energy balance of the plants, which requires to incorporate the triple influence of air temperature, irradiance, temperature, and latent heat loss induced by transpiration. And there are multiple couplings in this triple influence. So this is solved with a quite sophisticated nested iterative algorithm. So after this mock-up, a full scene of the vineyard was simulated in the exact orientation of the vineyard. And so we can simulate we could simulate the irradiance intercepted by each plant, which are the thinner lines here, with respect to the global incident irradiance here. On both sides of the rows, and you can easily see that on the southwest of the rows, the intercepted light irradiance was higher, much higher, which can explain why we observe higher temperature on the leaves on the southwest side of the rows than on the northeast side. So this was quite consistent with our observation, consistent also with other modeling approach that has been developed in other groups, and this led to recommend installation of the rows in east-west orientation or southeast-northwest orientation. The other point we observed was that there were more burns at the base of the plant. And again, using this modeling approach, we were able to simulate higher temperature at the basis of the plant than at the top of the plant here, when the heat peak was observed. But simulated this simulated leaf temperature profile depended on several hypotheses that we had to make in absence of measurements, mainly on stomatal control by evaporative demand, the vapor pressure deficit, and the possible feedback influence of photoinhibition. But the only solution leading to higher temperature and at the basis of the plant was an hypothesis of low stomatal sensitivity to VPD here, which was very high, 8.8 kilopascal, which is 3 times higher than usual conditions. And another hypothesis which influenced a lot our simulation was the soil temperature. There is a gradient of temperature from soil to air. So we know the temperature in the air, but we don't know the temperature in the soil. So we have to explore different scenarios regarding soil temperature. So we forced soil temperature to be able to simulate this kind of distribution of leaf temperature. So my conclusion at that point is that soil energy balance, canopy, and leaf boundary layer conductance should deserve more attention. This is strengthened by the fact that soil heat extremes can outspace air temperatures extremes, as mentioned in this publication. Here, this scale represents how soil temperature increases in time as regards air temperature, and it increases per decade by up to 1 degree Celsius per decade more in the soil than in the air. So again, this is largely influenced by change in land cover, aerodynamic conductance, and soil water and associated changes in soil properties. So this is needed to define how to manage soil practices in field conditions to mitigate future heat peaks. The other point I want to strengthen to highlight is that we were able to detect high genetic variability in this condition. What I didn't mention is that these potted plants were panel issued that we already spoke about. A panel issues from a selection of representative Vitis vinifera varieties, representative of the worldwide genetic diversity. So my colleagues Aude Coupel-Ledru and Florent Pantin tried to elaborate on this, considering that each square here was a different genotype in this plot. So they were able to detect single nuclear polymorphism. They are on the point to publish the results. I will not detail that further. But this means that a good genomic heritability could be found from these SNPs in the population. The question remains which underlying gene or trait are at the origin of this genetic variability. And that's the following of my talk. One of the interesting traits we explored was the leaf orientation, because when doing mock-ups of plants, obviously the orientation of the leaves is very influential on how much irradiance is captured by the plant, by the leaves. So the more they are inclined, the less they intercept radiation, and the cooler they are. So we try to characterize that. Still a work performed by my colleague Benoît Pallas and a PhD student, Mathilde Milin. So they characterize the angles of the leaves in different directions and different ways. I will not detail these different ways, still using a digitizing tool or using pipelines developed on image analysis acquired in the imaging cabins we have, with using the rotating facilities to always characterize the angle in the right position. And what they found is that there is a huge genetic variation among some specific genotypes here. Some offspring of a cross between Syrah and Grenache, two well-known emblematic varieties in South France. And we can see here very different profiles of leaf inclination along the stem axis here. So you can see the contrasted behavior of these two offsprings. And so they followed on by characterizing 33 varieties out of the diversity panels in the plot. They were not able to characterize all the genotypes, all the varieties, but the range of variation was quite huge, with almost horizontal leaves to very inclined leaves here. And so they could simulate different mock-ups representative of this range of variation. And they found that the percentage of variance in maximal leaf temperature obtained with these mock-ups in a given climatic scenario, the percentage of variance is quite huge as a function of leaf inclination in the 33 panel subset of varieties taken from the panel. Obviously, in cloudy conditions, this percentage of variance in blue here is very low, is lower, because there is less influence of direct radiation. But unfortunately, this variation in leaf inclination and in leaf temperature was not linked to the leaf burn observed in 2019 for this subset of varieties. So they looked for other characteristics, going back to the biophysics of the leaf energy balance. And the other traits which is very influential is evaporative cooling. And as you can see here, the more sensitive varieties among these subsets had a higher stomatal conductance with lower leaf temperature, which was counterintuitive. And the more resistant to heat peak varieties had a lower stomatal conductance with higher leaves. This is counterintuitive. With this lower leaf temperature, how can this variety be more sensitive to heat peak? I should remind you that this was characterized and the simulations were performed under usual climatic conditions, and we don't know the stomatal response under heat peak conditions. So maybe there is a discrepancy between this kind of behavior in usual conditions and what can be simulated in heat peak conditions, but we don't have the data to do that. So we also have other hypotheses to be tested. Maybe this higher stomatal conductance can lead to evaporative demand, under high evaporative demand, can lead to hydraulic failure and embolisms. I just illustrated here at in the bottom, the red line is for the air vapor pressure deficit in 2019, which was more than 2 times higher than the second highest VPD. So we examine also, they examine also other architectural traits. Certain were correlated with other ones, but none of them, either leaf internal length between 2 successive leaves or leaf area, none of them could explain the leaf burn symptoms. The last thing they did was to explore the phenotypic space in the search of architectural ideotypes. If we want to face the future heat peaks, not only we have to prepare varieties to face these heat peaks, but they also have to perform correctly in usual conditions. So first, we have to select ideotypes. Here we have favorable traits to face heat peaks, but we also have to select some favorable traits in more usual conditions. I mean, the highest possible assimilation rate at the same time, and maybe, why not, the highest water use efficiency at the same time. So my colleagues tried to optimize these 3 traits by combining them in this objective function, with a minus signus for maximal temperature, leaf temperature, plus signus for the favorable traits, assimilation rate, and water use and efficiency. And by developing original approaches, they combine this objective function with a distance with observed phenotypes in terms of architectural traits. So the observed phenotypes that we can call morphotypes are in red here. And if we want to be realistic, that is close to this observed morphotypes, we have to minimize this distance here. I will not detail here. Benoit could do that for me. And we have to maximize also the objective function. So the green points here are in the good region where we can have good properties for future heat peak and usual conditions, so to maintain production at the same time as facing future heat peaks. And this gives this kind of ideotypes. The red points correspond to this kind of mock-ups, this kind of combination of architectural traits, which results in this kind of morphotypes here. These are not the same, obviously, for sunny day condition, bright sunny day condition, and for cloudy day conditions. So I don't know whether I have still a few time. No, so I will skip over that. And to give my concluding remarks, that extreme events are difficult to reproduce using experimental field approach. So my recommendation will be to combine control condition and field observation. And I skipped over what we have begun with satellite observation. We can deduce very simple indices using NDVI, for example. This is a wealth of information to be exploited because currently wine growers are innovating a lot in field conditions. They have been offered the possibility to innovate using new varieties and new management practices. The statistical approaches also need to be developed for field data because there can be overall bias when observing damages in heat peak condition. We are more attracted by damaged condition and less by not damaged, undamaged conditions. We also have to solve problems with the scale of observation, at which scale we have to make our observation at the scale of the part of the leaf, the whole plant. And when dealing with field observation, we can use crowd sources data, but there is a matter of reliability in that area. And as I mentioned, there are disciplines that need to be revisited or revived mostly, like bioclimatology. I strengthened the role of the wind and the aerodynamic conditions of the plant. And we finally will need to develop multifactorial approach analysis, because we observed that the ranking of the genotypes was submitted to heat stress was not the same depending on the experimental condition. And I thank you for your attention. I just acknowledge all the people who were engaged in these actions, very recent actions, actually, and the other groups and the funding. Thank you.